welcome to the 905 podcast. My name is Roland Tanner.
I am Joel McLeod.
And we're introducing a guest this week. Last week, out of the blue somewhat, there was a fairly big story, I guess, coming out of the Ontario Liberals. Obviously, the Ontario Liberals, like the NDP, are currently in search of a new leader after what happened last year at the provincial election. And the story was a letter signed by a good number of Liberal members and Liberal supporters asking for Mike Schreiner of the Ontario Greens to basically consider jumping from the Greens and becoming or running for the leadership of the Ontario Liberals. Certainly came out of left field to me. Joining us to talk about that is former leadership candidate herself, Kate Graham, who's been a candidate twice in London, and was also involved in the campaign and in the policy, I believe, policy development platform for Stephen Del Duca. So, Kate Graham, welcome to the 905 podcast.
Good to see you, Roland and Joel. Thanks for having me.
And I
Thanks
mean,
for coming on.
I'll just quickly sort of throw out my customary disclaimer that I was a volunteer for the Ontario Liberals in the past. In fact, I knew Kate. I got to know you during that leadership election when I was involved kind of on your campaign in support of you at that time. Now, since then, very different world. I'm not a member of any political party anymore.
No, I'm not ready for anything. Yeah.
Completely independent, but I just want to make it clear what those connections are.
And I'm so grateful for that support. We had a ton of fun on, not successful, but we had a ton of fun on that campaign.
Leadership
I think I should just clarify. I have no ties to anybody.
A good disclaimer.
I threw out my political connections years ago, so I'm a free agent on this one. So
very nice.
There we go.
So, as I say, I mean, I had no knowledge that something like this was coming. And I certainly say it's thrown the cat amongst the pigeons, certainly. And we're seeing a range of opinions, shall we say, and we'll explore those over the next half hour or so. But first of all, I mean, you seem to be prominently involved in this move to basically say to a leader of another party, come and join us. We think you're the right guy. I mean, I guess the first question to ask is, well, if you think he's so great, why don't you join the Greens?
Yeah, lots of people have been writing that. So, well, maybe I can back up a little bit. I think, perspective always matters, and the experiences we have shape kind of what we're looking for in politics and in any party. So I ran, as you said, as a candidate in the last two elections, 2018 and 2022. Both were totally getting devastating losses for the party, right? Historic lows 2 times in a row. And in between, ran in a leadership race where, we had someone who was a longtime insider in the party, literally as a kid was folding envelope or folding pamphlets on shares, had every role in the party and so on, and then became the leader of the party. I ran as a relative newcomer, and it's hard for new people to break into a political party for a whole variety of reasons. And I think for me, the big lesson coming out of this last election, 2022, we saw fewer people than ever before turn out to vote, and a larger mandate given to the provincial government, the Ford Conservatives. And we now see dismantling the green belt and privatization of healthcare and all kinds of things that fundamentally I don't think most Ontarians want. So I am not interested in seeing parties just kind of keep playing the same game that I don't think is working anymore. So my appetite for big, bold, transformative, let's do things that send an extremely loud message that we welcome in new people and new ideas. We're open to working with other parties where we share the same policy goals. All of those things I think are really important, especially right now. And I think the Ontario Liberal Party needs that very, very badly. So this idea, actually, I'll give props to Steve Paikin, wrote an article last fall saying hear me out, but I think Mike Schreiner should run. And I think like many people, I read that article and thought, Steve Paikin is a very bright guy. What are you talking about? That is bonkers. And it sparked, though, like every time I'd run into a Liberal, like everybody's talking about, what do you think about this? How would this work? What would this look like? What would this mean? Like maybe the parties could work together, but like just a huge amount of energy in these kind of quiet chats. And over the course of that, found a lot of people who, like me, were sort of grew to be kind of intrigued by the idea. And I certainly, really like Mike. I think he's done an absolutely admirable job as the Green leader. I like his commitment to and consistent push on a few key issues, but he's also run a political party that's been very good at building a kind of grassroots internal culture, and where there's a lot of policy alignment. So, I became more and more excited about this idea. And so over the course of the last, week, 2 weeks or so, there was a thought to, maybe we should do a draft campaign, which is, intended to get people talking. It's definitely done that. It's been 24 hours and my DMs are like exploded to a level that like I've tweeted a lot of stuff about the Ontario Liberal Party. I'm not sure anything has taken off quite like this, but we are getting people talking about what they think about this possibility, from the good, the bad, the ugly. People are having a huge range of reactions from, oh my goodness, where do I help and how can I sign up, to, Kate, you're a Liberal traitor, and lots of things like that too, and everything in the middle. So, who knows where this will wind up, but I've never been one to kind of shy away from publicly saying when I think something big needs to change. And I do think the Ontario Liberal Party needs change, including welcoming new people and being open to working with other parties. And I think Mike is uniquely positioned in Ontario to be able to do exactly that, which is why I signed the letter and why I'm chatting with you tonight.
Kind of on that note, though, I mean, when Steve Paikin wrote that article, that was kind of like right after the last provincial election, and the Liberals were kind of licking their wounds, and it just kind of honestly dumbstruck after that last result.
Yeah.
Since then, there are names being floated around. So just some of the names that I'm aware of. Nate Erskine Smith, who's the federal Liberal MP for Beaches East York. Jeff Lehman, Mayor of Barrie. Yasser Naqvi, who's a former Liberal MPP and a current Ottawa MP. Mitzi Hunter and Ted Sue are both current Liberal MPPs sitting in the legislature. Their names being thrown around right now to run for leader of the party. And I'm wondering, what about them do you see being problematic towards rebuilding of the Liberal Party of Ontario? What does Mike Schreiner have that these people do not, that you would need to reach outside the party to bring him in?
So we have, as you identified the names, fabulous people who are, I hope, planning to step into this leadership race. And that is great. Many of them who I have huge admiration for. I actually called those who have said something publicly about thinking about running, called them before this letter came out to just express exactly this, that I have at least some idea of what it takes to run for leader. It's an enormous commitment, and I'm really glad they're doing it. And I think they're wonderful. I also, at the same time, believe that a competitive, exciting, dynamic leadership race is very badly needed. And I want to see people in that race who are inside the party, as all of them are, have their roots in the Ontario and the Liberal movement. And I want to see a few outsiders. And I think that we need that badly. I think, a leadership race can, when it's competitive and exciting, can draw in that appeal, can bring new people into the fold, thinking about what is possible. It's often where parties sort of negotiate who they are and what they stand for, and so on. Like the leadership race is a chance to express that. So I think a competitive race is good for everybody. I want to see insiders and outsiders. And again, I think the race is stronger with Mike in it. I happened, when I ran in the leadership race in 2020, it was actually very collegial. Like we would go for debates and then we'd literally all go out for cocktails across the street afterwards. Like it doesn't have to be this like winner takes all kind of mindset, which is a problem in politics generally. Like if it's good for one, it's bad for the other. I don't buy that. Like I reject that premise. I think a good competitive race is needed. I think conversation between parties about how we work together is also needed. And I think this may facilitate some of that happening, which I feel optimistic about. So certainly no slight against the existing candidates.
But there is just one big difference between what you just stated and what you're proposing. When you head out for cocktails or afterwards to say, way to go, you are all Liberals. Like there is something to be said about, there's a culture in the party, the Liberal Party members, grassroots members, identify themselves a certain way to be liberals. Mike clearly does not, because he did not sign up to be a liberal. And I'm wondering, like, are you going to have potential culture clash there, where you have somebody who he made a choice not to initially sign up to be a liberal, and you're saying you want to bring him to run a party that a lot of people might not be on board with that?
And maybe it's I'm personally not somebody who, like, for me, the party identity is the first and most important thing. Like, I'm a liberal because I believe in things the liberals have championed before, like public education, healthcare, and action on climate change, and so on. But for me, like, the why isn't the party. Like, the party is a means to an end. In London North Centre, the Green candidate, who we never say run against, but we say run alongside, we've become very good friends, brilliant woman, her name's Carol Dick. And in the debates, for 2 elections in a row, often we used to kind of joke and call it the red green show, because, like, she'd say something and I'd say our platform's the same, and I would say something and she'd say, yeah, what Kate said. At one event, it was just the 2 of us who'd showed up, and we said, do you want us to just point out for you, like, the very nuanced places where our platforms are different? There are differences, and maybe we should just talk about those. Maybe that's more useful. So, Mike cares about climate change, and Ontario Liberals care about climate change. Mike cares about income inequality. He actually, I would say, bested us in the last campaign on having a much more progressive platform on that front than we did. There are a lot of things. They have the same position on Bill 23 and opposing the privatization of healthcare and all kinds of other things. So what I see in Mike is somebody who's not party first. He's policy first. He wants to accomplish things, very similar things to what I think most Ontario Liberals would say they want to accomplish too. So for me, I don't see things through partisan lenses. I generally want to see politics be less about what's good for what party and more about what's good for the province and what gets us closer to being able to accomplish goals. And many of the goals that Mike Schreiner talks about, as an Ontario Liberal, I would say I agree. So
I mean, the thing that struck me, the thing that struck me with just knowing what I know about politics, and I'm not claiming to be super insightful or ever to reach any particular great height, but I mean, I do know that things like this don't happen if someone hasn't already had a conversation. So someone has already called Mike Schreiner a week or so ago, a month ago, 2 months, however long, and run this past him. And I'm not saying that he had any knowledge of the timing or anything like that. No, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But what I immediately noticed was that there wasn't an immediate response for him saying no. And actually now there has been a response from him today saying, I'm thinking about it, which in itself, I was almost surprised by that he had, that it was, for the leader of the party not to say an immediate and unequivocal no is almost surprising. But were there conversations with Mike Schreiner beforehand? I mean, is this something that's been kind of negotiated with him to any degree?
So I would say kind of yes and no. So on one hand, for a long time, I would say people have been asking very quietly beneath the surface since that Paikin article came out. I know a lot of Liberals they're in a meeting with Mike and they're like, by the way, if you thought about doing this, like, I would be supportive of that. I personally, I don't really know Mike. I've actually only seen him like in person a few times. The first time was like a couple of years ago, sitting actually in the lobby outside of a media interview. And at that time I was like, just for the record, like, I know I'm here from the competitor party, quote unquote, but like, I love what you're doing inside the Green Party, and especially the real commitment to grassroots, able to do a lot with a little, it seems. And like, there's a lot of things I admire about what you're doing. So on one hand, like, yes, lots and lots of people inside the party, including those who signed the letter, and certainly those who like have seen Mike, more recently perhaps than I have said like, hey, I think you should think about doing this. Paikin wrote the story, everybody's talking about it. What do you think? So there's been lots of those quiet discussions, but nothing public, nothing out in the open, nothing to kind of engage that broader conversation. So the letter was set up like entirely independently of Mike, but there was a heads up note sent to him. So we didn't totally blindside him. He knew it was coming out. But I mean, even the people who have been a part of this letter, like, I have no idea how this story unfolds. You know, it was the openness to like, I'll think about it. You know, it was great that it wasn't an outright no. We'll see. Maybe this changes his consideration. I have no idea. So yeah, there was a heads up given and lots of quiet asking. But the intention of a draft campaign, as I said, is to get people talking and feel out what would the reaction be. Is there any appetite for this? And I think, you know, if the first 24 hours of the letter being out are any indication, it's been very successful in getting people talking about the Ontario Liberal Party in a way that we haven't seen for a long time.
Well, yeah, and I will fully admit that's the case. That, you know, we thought about when we were going to, as a podcast, address the leadership, and it was not yet. And this has made us talk about it. So yeah, from that point of view,
small victories. Yeah.
I'm just going to ask sort of two questions before I sort of pass it back to Joel, and that's first of all, I mean, the names on your list include some very prominent names. Maybe aren't super familiar to people outside the party, but are extremely familiar to insiders. I'm thinking of Pat Sorbara, Greg Sorbara. You know, this isn't the young face of the party though either necessarily. When you're saying Greg Sorbara, Deb Matthews, former health minister, Liz Sandals, and other people who are, you know, more well-known insiders within the party. But there's also very, very prominent names that are not mentioned here, including most of the current caucus, and many former MPPs or riding presidents, etc. And just, you know, going by social media, that, you know, to say there's a range of opinion, I mean, there are some very, very strong opinion that this is not the right thing. Well, I mean, what do you say to those people? The people who are saying, you know, this is treason, so to speak, you know? I mean, it's not the point that I mean, I have certainly spoken about the need for the progressive parties to cooperate, and that if you look at the platforms, the similarities are overwhelmingly larger than the differences when you're talking about every party but one, the one that doesnn't have a platform at all. Yeah. However, it isn't a discussion that we should be having, rather than let's steal a leader from someone else and see if we can get him to win for us rather than his own party, to say, we need to get our leader, and then we need to sit down and be talking about the kind of arrangements that the federal parties have done with the NDP, and we need to be talking about proportional representation and electoral reform, and working across boundaries that way to create an alliance so that we don't allow a party to win with 29% of the vote or whatever it was. Are you not putting the cart before the horse here, and kind of being slightly insulting to both the membership of the Liberals and the and the Greens, to be honest, to saying, you know, you want your leader because we think we're better than you? I mean, it's not really reaching out to them when you're doing that, is it? So there's a lot of questions in there. Sorry.
Well, so yeah, you know, you're definitely right about, and I think actually the way you just articulated it captures like a lot of the, from question to concern to like, is this downright wrong? Like, there have been all kinds of different perspectives over the last while. Again, I see things through a particular lens based on my own experience, which is certainly not exhaustive of all of the different perspectives people have on this, and we need to hear more of that. So that's a good thing. As I said, I'm just not convinced that the current way of operating, even like you know, we're gonna have this race and we're going to put forward people and choose, like, without being open to discussing other things, other opportunities, the again, zero sum, what's good for one has to be bad for another. I'm not sure that's, you know, like, there's no like kind of master plan here. This is a very first, in some ways, a very simple kind of timid step of saying, we think this guy seems really open to working together, and he seems very principled, and we care a lot about the same stuff, and we hope he explores it. And through that exploration, like, there's any number of ways this could turn it or not, or maybe he says, I'm good, like, I like leading the Green Party in the end, and, you know, we will go and choose a fabulous leader, I'm sure. So yeah, so I don't know. And I do, the one thing I sort of feel badly about how this is all unfolded is I do think some people feel deeply offended, and like this is intended as some sort of slight, like, or like we've, you know, lost faith in the Liberal Party, and it's very much not that. Like, I ran as a candidate for a party that did extremely badly once again, and I want to see major transformation. And I do think we need a big conversation about that. And nobody's really been talking about the leadership race. Like it's been a little sleepy so far. And that's part of that's because it hasn't really started yet. But, we need a few big things to get people engaged and fired up and thinking big and imagining what might be possible, including things that are very different than what we've seen before, very out of the box. So, knowing what I would be walking into, which was a lot of the anger and things that have certainly happened. I don't think I appreciated that people would feel so that it was like intended as such a personal slight or like an attack on the party. That's certainly not what, like, my motivation is the opposite of that. I want to see a change in government in Ontario, and the current way we are doing these things isn't doing it. It's not more complicated than that for me. So, but again, this is what's been really interesting over the last 24 hours is, people see this from lots of different angles. And again, I think that is part of what we're trying to do is get those discussions out into the open so we collectively can really think through what opportunities may or may not be there.
But on that note, I used to be a former Liberal staffer, and I do have people who are still current staffers. I've know people who were staffers to some of the signatories to that letter, and I know for a fact that they are really hurt by this. They feel there's words like betrayal and backstabbing, not my words, some of theirs. It's just a real feeling of hurt there, and it raises the question in my mind, hypothetically going forward. Say you're successful in getting Mike to come over, and you manage to sign up enough supporters to get him the top job in the party. How then do you go about healing that rift to move ahead as a united party? Because Lord knows we have seen what divided Liberal parties do at the federal level. They do not win. They fail miserably. How do you go about healing that rift to take the party forward to victory?
I think this is one of the consequences of the, in politics is I think we have a bit of a, like, we organize ourselves into warring factions and then we have a hard time coming together. This is true of most leadership races where like one campaign is like diametrically opposed to the other. And then a leader is chosen. And the task always is, how do you bring together people who spent months and months of their time and talent opposing the person who is now the leader of the party? So like those kind of rifts, I think, unfortunately, are like a very common part. Now, this scenario, like the specifics of a letter, a leader outside the party, like it's a little bit different. I think maybe the hurt is a little bit more, and it was a surprise. So I think that like magnified the reaction like by a lot. I reached out to someone who had, as a former staffer who'd had the same sort of reaction and just wanted to ask more about that view. And I think I came away from that conversation with a better sense of kind of how deeply felt that was. So yes, so there are going to be rifts to be built. I think that is a feature of every leadership race. Sorry. Okay, sorry. I'll thank you very much. Sorry, for those listening. I taught till 9:30 tonight. It is currently 10 o'clock, and housekeeping just knocked on the door of my classroom. I have to get out.
Well,
so
we won't take up too much more.
but if
I'd
sorry,
let you finish your thought though.
Yeah, just so I do think that's a very real consideration going forward. And as we build a party, we need to get better at having different ideas, supporting different candidates, maybe imagining different end games, but being able to come back together. And as I said, I think that'll be a challenge for whoever the leader becomes, just by virtue of how these things are organized. But my hope is that we build an internal culture of really listening to and respecting even people of different opinions than our own. I didn't feel the benefit of that yesterday, quite the opposite. But so I think we've got some growth to do there, and I can certainly do some growing on that front too. As I should have reached out to a few people who had different angles on this even before releasing the letter. That would have been a good move, and so I take full responsibility for that. So lots of growth to happen.
Have we got time for one final quick question before
yes, the person kicking me out I think has gone to another room, so I got a minute.
And actually, we're I think certainly what we can I think most people can agree is that there needs to be a change in the way that party politics is done. I think the vast majority of people in Ontario who are not party members would agree with that statement. Yep. I think the vast majority of people would well, I think it's simply a fact that this has got people talking in a way that wasn't happening before. Whether that's going to be good for the leadership race, time will tell. I mean, I just finally wanted to kind of ask actually a slightly different question, and that's about the leadership process. Because I mean, I know I've been involved in 2 leadership races in the Ontario Liberals, and understand they're pretty much similar. Well, they're not similar, but they boil down to membership buying, and that's the same for the PCs, and it's the same for the Ontario Liberals. I believe it's probably the same for the NDP. I'm not actually sure. And it's how many people you can sign up. And I felt, and I wonder if you felt the same as a having been through that process, that the process by which members were signed up was not always entirely as clear cut and above board as it might have been. Is that something that you think should be addressed as the leadership race gets underway? Basically, what I'm talking about here is the way that memberships are signed up and purchased wasn't always. Well, I think it could have been criticized if someone had wanted to criticize it. Do you think that that's something that will be changed in the future?
Yeah, so I mean, one big change since the last leadership race is now memberships are free. So I think that will help. The other big question that's tied up with money is about how we actually choose the leader. In March, the Ontario Liberals will be meeting and considering a whole bunch of choices, and one of them is a shift to a different way of like, so when it's a delegated convention, for example, people have to pay hundreds of dollars in a registration fee. And if you don't live in Toronto or wherever it is, usually in the GTA somewhere, you have to travel in. If you're a parent, you have to get childcare and so on. And like, that is a very real barrier, right? That makes it harder for people to mobilize candidates who are less affluent, who live outside the GTA and so on. So there will be a couple of options. I'm personally a fan of like a 1 member, 1 vote. I'm a fan of like reducing those financial barriers for people being able to participate in even the final selection. So all of that I think needs to change and will be discussed very actively in March. I hope we got close last time. I hope that there's enough support to be able to change it this time, because yeah, that's definitely been a stumbling block for getting people engaged in the past, and it has a whole host of other challenges, as you alluded to.
And you know, I mean, I guess final question.
I'm getting this right now outside the door.
Yeah, all right. Well, actually, maybe we should just leave it there. You've been generous with your time, and I don't want you to get in trouble with the. Right. We really appreciate you joining. It certainly kicked off a discussion, and discussions should hopefully be good things, right?
Well, you threw off our schedule to talk about the Ontario Liberal leadership, that's for sure.
Well, and to both of you, like, thank you for covering this, and to people listening, like, if you've got thoughts, good, bad, and ugly about this, like, speak up. That's what this is supposed to be all about. If you happen to be inclined, you can find out more at draftmike.ca and add your name. If you're not inclined and you think this is, you've got other thoughts, share those too. Equally interested in hearing them. So I'm glad we're talking about this.
That certainly, it's good to talk about this stuff. So thank you, Kate Graham, so much for joining us. We really appreciate that. And as we do with any candidate in any election, whether leaderships or otherwise, we wish you all the best with it.
Okay, thanks very much. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.